Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. We have a new BotaniCuts dye coming to the shop, and this one is a summer classic. It's Hollyhocks. In this video, I'll show you how I like to color them and also how to assemble them. So I have my Hollyhocks die cut from white cardstock. I left all of the pieces nested inside the negative. I also have it positioned on a piece of sticky mat. These are Cricut cutting mats that I like to use. I cut down and I like to use them to hold bits and pieces in place while I'm inking and that sort of thing. So I'm going to show you my favorite way of coloring these. I'm going to be using some Distress Oxide inks. We're going to make some coral, kind of corally colored hollyhocks today, and so I have abandoned coral, and I'm also using a finger sponge dauber. So I will be also adding some colored pencil shading, and I'm using Faber-Castell's Polychromos. I have kind of a red color. This is deep red. And then for the center of the flowers, I'll be using mustard seed oxide inks. So like I said, I have left all of my pieces nested inside except for the little flower centers. Those I pulled out and put over here just because it's a little bit difficult to not ink those, and I want those to be yellow. So while I'm inking everything else up, I pulled those out so I don't get the coral color ink onto those. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my sponge dauber to just ink all of these petals. For the stem, there are two different stems included in the set. The one I'm going to be using in today's video is the one that already has the blooms positioned for you. There is a separate stem which is just a stem, which allows you to do kind of your own arrangement of blooms, but I will show you this version today, which is how they are kind of designed to go together. And yeah, like this individual stem here just allows you a little more variation if you want more or fewer blooms, which is kind of works out great for if you want to use a bunch of hollyhock stems on a card, then this will give you a little variety so that not all of your stems are the same. Just makes it more natural looking. So for the stem, there's blooms attached, and I'm just going to kind of roughly ink those up. Most of this gets covered, so you don't really need to be so exact, but I'm just gonna add a little bit of color to the blooms and then make sure that I don't get the bloom color onto the stem portions, because that I'm going to ink with some greens. And so I'm gonna be using Mowed Lawn to ink up the rest of the stem, which is the green part. And if you get a little bit onto the blooms, that's okay. Most of this just gets covered up. While I'm at it, I will go ahead and also ink up the leaves. Like I mentioned, I will also add some colored pencil shading, and I like to do is just take a nice sharp colored pencil and make some strokes, concentrating that color to the center of the petals. And you don't need to color the flower bases here, which is the larger solid pieces. I'm just going to be adding shading to the petals because most of those bases gets covered up by the petals. I'll also go ahead and add some shading to my leaves, just using that same technique. So now it's time to assemble the blooms. So I'm going to go ahead and pull off the negative portion of my die cut so that all of my blooms and petals are left on my sticky mat. Alright, so now I have all of these blooms. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 blooms that need to be assembled. And this die also comes with a guide, which you will see all of the pieces labeled, and the flowers get assembled onto the stem. These are labeled on the guide. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and your flowers go in order down the die. So this is flower 1, flower 2, flower 3, flower 4. So you just need to go 1, 2, 3, 4 after you have those all assembled. And assembly is pretty easy. Each of the bases of the individual flowers will have a small embossed circle. For example, this one right here is the circle right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a little dot of glue on all of those little embossed circles on the flower bases. So then we can go ahead and start adding the first layer of petals. It doesn't really matter, each flower bloom has 2 petal layers. It doesn't really matter which layer gets added first, but you can go ahead and add those, and each of those embossed circles where we put our dot of glue correlates with kind of the V of those petals, where the petals meet. So then you can also check for the outer edge of the petals to match up. So for example, this has this little notch, and so then we know that's where that goes, and that center kind of V of the almost like a butterfly shape on those petals gets attached to that glue dot. Then we're going to add another dot of glue in that same spot where those petals meet on each of those layers, and add our second layer of petals. And then we're going to add another dot of glue so we can add our flower centers. One thing I like to do to give my petals a little more dimension is take that bloom and I will lay it on a piece of foam. So this is just a piece of fun foam, craft foam, and then I'll take a stylus and just press in the center of that flower. And that kind of makes those petals just pop up a little bit and gives that flower some extra dimension. Our flowers are all assembled, so we can go ahead and add them to our stem. And like I said, we have flowers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4. I kind of kept those in order as I was assembling them just to make it a little bit easier. So then you just go ahead and match up the blooms and add them to the base. Then we can also add our leaves. You will see some little knobs on the end of the little stems that are kind of coming out of the main stem. And so I can just add some dots of liquid glue to those, and I'll go ahead and add my leaves. There's also a little bud which you can add. There's a spot on the stem for that as well, and that's right in there under flowers 1 and 2. So there we have our pretty assembled hollyhock stem. Like I mentioned before, we have an alternate stem here if you want to make a hollyhock that has less blooms. For example, I did that on this card where I just wanted to have a couple of blooms and I had some space then for my butterfly wings. Just gives you a little more options and control of your design. Thanks for joining me. I hope you love the newest addition to our BotaniCuts collection, the hollyhock. It's definitely a summer classic.